Today, we're diving into a book that completely changed the game for how we think about right and wrong, Immanuel Kant's Critique of Practical Reason.
Okay, let's just jump right in with the huge question that has been bugging philosophers for centuries. Is there such a thing as a universal moral law? You know, a rule for what's right and wrong that isn't just based on your feelings or your culture or what some authority figure tells you, but on something solid, something unshakable.
Well, back in 1788, the legendary German philosopher Immanuel Kant published his answer. This very book, The Critique of Practical Reason, laid out a totally radical new foundation for morality, one that he was convinced could finally give us that universal rule. So to really appreciate just how revolutionary Kant's idea was, we first have to understand what he was arguing against. What was the big problem with all the moral systems that came before him?
Kant basically looked around at all the existing philosophies and saw them as being built on, well, sand. He saw moral codes based on all sorts of things: what your government demands, what happens to feel good, what God commands, or what might lead to a so-called perfect life. But for Kant, every single one of these was flimsy. They all depended on circumstances that could change. They weren't universal.
And what's so fascinating is how Kant just grouped all these different systems together. As you can see here, it didn't matter to him if the source of morality was outside you, like the government, or inside you, like a gut feeling. He saw one fundamental flaw in all of them. He even gave this flaw a name: heteronomy. Now, it sounds technical, but the idea is actually super simple. It just means other law. The moral rules were always coming from somewhere outside of our own pure reason. And for Kant, that was the root of the entire problem.
So if the moral law couldn't be found in governments or feelings or even gods, where could it possibly be? This brings us to Kant's brilliant answer. He argued that if the law isn't out there, then it has to be in here, right inside our own capacity to reason. Kant's key tool for this is what he calls practical reason. And this isn't some abstract, head-in-the-clouds kind of thinking. It's simply reason applied to action. It's our amazing ability to think about what we should do and then actually make a decision to determine our will. He believed that this power, which all rational beings share, is the true source of the moral law. And this brings us to the absolute heart of the entire book. This one sentence is the formula for Kant's supreme principle of morality, what he famously called the categorical imperative. This is it. This is the test for whether any action is moral or not. Okay, let's break that down, because it's a bit of a mouthful. A maxim is just your personal rule for what you're about to do. For example, I will lie to get what I want. And universal legislation is just a fancy way of saying a law that could apply to everyone, everywhere, all the time, no exceptions. So what Kant is asking is this: could the personal rule for your action become a rule for everybody? If the answer is no, if making it a universal rule would create a logical contradiction or a world nobody could rationally want, then the act is immoral. Simple as that.
Now here's where things get really interesting. This abstract moral law isn't just some dusty rule for how to behave. For Kant, it has a staggering implication for what it means to be human. Following this law, a law that comes from our own reason, is the very definition of freedom. And this table illustrates that core distinction perfectly. On one side, you have heteronomy, or other law. That's when you're being driven by your desires, your fears, or rules that somebody else gave you. Kant says that's not real freedom. You're basically a slave to your impulses or to other people. But on the other side, there's autonomy, or self-law. This is when you act according to a law you give to yourself through your own reason, the moral law. That, for Kant, is what it means to be truly and authentically free.
I mean, this is a complete 180 on how ethics was done for centuries. Think about it. Most philosophers started by trying to define the good. Maybe the good is happiness or pleasure or God's will, and then they'd come up with rules to help you get there. Kant's move is totally revolutionary because he flips it. He says, forget about defining the good first. Let's find the unshakable moral law through reason, and then we can say that the good is simply acting in line with that law, just for the sake of duty itself. Morality isn't about getting a result. It's about the rightness of the action, period. But of course, this raises a very human question. If morality is all about following your duty, no matter the consequences, then what about happiness?
Exactly. We all know that doing the right thing doesn't always make you feel good. In fact, sometimes it makes you miserable. This creates a kind of paradox, an antinomy, as Kant calls it. Our reason tells us to be virtuous, but it also seems perfectly rational to want to be happy. So how do you reconcile those two things?
Kant's answer is this idea of the highest good, or summum bonum. You can think of it as the ideal state of the universe, the ultimate goal where perfect virtue is perfectly rewarded with an equal amount of happiness. Our reason tells us this is how things should be, even if it's clear that's not how it works in our day-to-day lives.
So to make this highest good even remotely possible, Kant says our practical reason has to postulate, or let's just say assume for practical purposes, two things that we can never really prove. First, the immortality of the soul because, let's be honest, achieving moral perfection is probably going to take longer than one lifetime. And second, the existence of God, a rational, powerful force who can guarantee that the universe is ultimately just and that virtue and happiness do, in the end, line up. Again, these aren't proofs, they're just necessary assumptions for a rational moral life to make any sense.
And all of this leads us to Kant's incredibly powerful and deeply personal conclusion about where morality truly lives.
This is one of the most famous lines in all of philosophy, and for good reason. Kant is saying that the feeling of absolute awe isn't just found in the vast, ordered universe outside of us, but also in the equally vast and ordered moral law that we find inside our own reason. You really can't overstate the impact of this book. It established the entire foundation for modern duty-based ethics, or what's known as deontological ethics, and its core argument that moral authority doesn't come from God or society, but from our own rational freedom, changed philosophy forever.
And so Kant's great challenge echoes down to us today. He asks us to shift our gaze from the heavens, to look inside our own minds, to find the bedrock of morality not in some external rulebook, but within our own capacity for reason. The final question he leaves for all of us is simple, yet profound. When you look inside, do you find it there?